Welcome to this audio session recording taken at the Agroforestry Show, which was organised in September 2023 as a partnership between the Woodland Trust and the Soil Association. For more session recordings, go to agroforestryshow.com or explore and subscribe to the Agroforestry Show YouTube channel. Enjoy!
So my name's Seren Patterson and I'm the Water Stewardship Manager at the Rivers Trust, but I also manage the Woodlands for Water project. So I'm going to be chairing the brilliant panel of speakers that we have today. But really what we really want is to kind of then hand over to you. So as we're discussing, if you could really think about some key questions that you have for us, and to really kind of think about what you'd like to discuss. We've got a good chunk of time at the end, and then we'll have a couple of roving microphones going around, so that would be brilliant. So I'm just going to start with a very quick introduction as to who we are and why we're here today. So about 3.5 years ago, the Rivers Trust, the National Trust, the Woodland Trust and the Beaver Trust all got together and realised that we all had this shared vision for wanting to create a mosaic of riparian habitats across our rivers and streams in the UK. We realised that this is obviously quite a big ambition. A lot of these habitats have been depleted throughout the years, so trying to restore them is no mean feat. But we have launched our flagship project, which is Woodlands for Water, and it's funded through DEFRA. And we're working in 6 Pathfinder catchments, as well as across all of the National Trust English estate. And we're providing free woodland advice to any landowners who are interested in planting a riparian woodland or any other strategic catchment planting as well. It doesn't necessarily have to be right on the riverbank. In these Pathfinders, as I said, we've got an agricultural advisor that goes out and provides that one-to-one advice to the landowner. Once we've done this, we then look at the different funding schemes available. So obviously the England Woodland Creation Offer is a great option. This obviously isn't always the best choice, so we do look at the array of other schemes that are on the table, and we'll cover those in the panel discussion today. So once we've done this, obviously the bigger ambition is that we do kind of start to restore these habitats, and Adrian is going to talk about how much benefit they do bring to our landscapes. But some of the key questions that we really want to address today, this is obviously an agroforestry conference, so how does this relate to agroforestry? And why should we actually protect these habitats and restore them? What does it mean for us? So hopefully we can answer these questions as we go through the panel. But as I said, please do make sure you've got lots of questions for us at the end, and we can have a lovely discussion. So Adrian, if you'd like to introduce yourself first, and then we'll go along and then we can start the discussion.
Okay, thanks, Seren. I'm Adrian Southern, Head of Landscape Delivery with the Woodland Trust, so that's a role that is UK-wide. That involves managing things like our treescape programme, which is 10 large landscape areas around the UK. It also involves working with our policy and our evidence teams and our agroforestry teams around landscape scale delivery. It also includes strategic partnership work, and one of those strategic partnerships that I was a founder of was this Riverscapes partnership. So it's one of my favourite partnerships, really.
Thanks. Chris, would you like to go next?
I'm Chris Jones, and I'm a farmer and was a founder of Beaver Trust, which is how I got involved with the lovely Woodlands for Water people. I've been planting trees at home on the farm since the 80s, and we doubled the woodland area. And having been at Bangor, where a lot of pioneering work was on agroforestry, I was very interested in that too, and we've been plugging away at that sort of since about 2010 or so, and we've done some acres of nut plantation, and latterly a bunch of silver pasture and wood pasture. And I think my role with this wonderful group of people at Woodlands for Water is just to try and inject a note of reality, because it's very, very easy when you're working with NGOs and so on to forget that the environment, it all actually belongs to someone, rightly or wrongly, it all belongs to somebody. And if you haven't got them on board and can sort of talk their language, it's very hard to get anything done. So I guess that's probably my main qualification for being on this. And when we get down to questions, I hope I'll be able to continue doing that. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think it's not just NGOs that you should be talking about, but definitely people like me, government policymakers. So I'm Naomi Mattison, and I head up trees and forestry policy in DEFRA. So I'm responsible for the policy context for trees and forestry across England. And that's me.
Hello, I'm Ben Gallant from West Country Rivers Trust, one of the managers in our rivers team there. I've been there for a number of years. Woodland creation, freshwater environment, really important to everything. Prior to that, my background's in our woodland creation, forestry consultancy and contracting, that side of things. So looking at the ways to make the difference and actually how to implement them on the ground is quite an exciting piece of the puzzle, and joining that together. So yeah, should be a good day.
Perfect, thanks, Ben. So hopefully you can see there's lots of different skills that we've got on the panel today. So I'm hoping we've got Ben and Chris, obviously, from that practical perspective and obviously being a landowner and working directly with landowners. Adrian, obviously, from the technical perspective, and then Naomi from the policy perspective. So Adrian, if I start with you, so how would the Woodland Trust summarise the benefits of riparian planting directly and indirectly?
I think the first key point to make is it's going beyond the 1 metre buffer zone and moving into floodplains and trying to do a better job of managing our floodplains. So with that context in mind, I'd summarise sort of 7 key benefits around soil erosion, reducing soil erosion, stabilising riverbanks, and that's helping to prevent pollution going into the river. Pesticides as well, so that's the second key point around it, can help to reduce pesticide runoff into rivers. Carbon sequestration. We do have as part of our team a carbon specialist trying to look at how we do schemes that sometimes are quite small and maybe create group schemes around carbon and carbon sequestration and payments around that. Wildlife corridors are really quite a real biodiversity benefit here, particularly if you start thinking across multiple holdings and across the whole catchment, connecting other pieces of woodland and allowing species to move through the landscape. The other ones are on river health. If we're thinking about this within both the farm holding, but then also in the wider catchment, you've got real benefits around river health. That can be, for example, shading of the river, which has been directly linked to salmon population increases. You know, trees. Fish do also live on trees. They get themselves in the roots. It's a nice place for them to protect themselves from predation, and they form little nursery areas. So it's good for the fisheries. And also flood management. Key point there, again, is around at holding level, depends on your size, but then thinking about the whole catchment, natural flood management, and slowing the flow, that kind of thing. I think what's key, though, is that although there's evidence to back everything up that I've said, we do need to be specific to catchments and specific to holdings. So there's opportunities if you're interested in picking up more on advice, either how we approach doing that advice, or if you're interested because you're on land, pop in, sign up to the design clinic, or pop into the Woodland Trust stand, and those will help you out with some of the approaches we're taking.
Brill. And obviously, Adrian, this is an agroforestry conference, so perhaps some of the audience is wondering, how does this actually fit into agroforestry?
It does really depend on how you like to define agroforestry. I think from a Woodland Trust point of view, we define agroforestry as a sort of spectrum from a few trees on the land. That could be a few trees in a hedgerow, or it could be a field corner, or a bit of woodland. You then get your riparian areas, you start planting up that. To the other end of the spectrum, where you've got your complex fruit and nut productive systems. So it's trees on your farm, trees on the land, and all their guises. So the riparian area can be quite an important sort of space where perhaps the land's not as productive. It can all add up to some of the benefits I've just mentioned. And I think there's something really important around the scale of this. So are we thinking around catchments as well as holdings, and thinking about trees within the wider context of that? There are there's some interesting evidence around how this can be particularly beneficial for livestock, increasing productivity through shade, reductions in impacts around liver fruit and root rot, foot rot. all that as part of a sort of natural solutions approach, not panaceas, but it can all add up. With trees in a wetter pasture, you can increase the period of grazing, for example. So again, all adding up to helping to try and increase productivity of livestock. I think there's also something around just the aesthetic value of having a few trees in the landscape, and the river that can be an entirely nice cool habitat to go to on a day like this, for example. Imagine if you're livestock and you want to try and be shading yourselves a bit. So that would be sort of the real key benefits that I would focus on.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris, go for it.
Thanks. I think the criticality is, as far as buffering goes, that we have a buffer wide enough to be effective, decide what that is between us and the ministry and all the rest of it, but a wide enough buffer to be effective, and then have a series of potential solutions from, if you like, in the first place, no more unnatural processes. So basically take away the cultivation, take away the chemistry. That's the very, very first thing to do. And then everything after that on a rising spectrum from there up to and including closed canopy woodland. And I think if there was something I would criticise Woods for Water is, it's not through the fault of this lovely crowd of people, but just it was laid down by Forestry Commission that we're talking about establishing mostly closed canopy woodland, and there's relatively little nuance about that. So, number one, get away from the unnatural land use and head more into no chemistry, no cultivation.
Thanks, Chris. So it's really good to hear about all the benefits that riparian woodlands create, but practically for a landowner, how do you get started? So Ben, what's one of the first steps that you can take as a landowner on this journey?
Yeah, well, I guess everyone's here today, so that's a good start. You're at the right event to talk about it, so we sort of head off with that one. We've promoted the stand. There's tons of good stands around here, so come and talk to colleagues. So an initial step, the Forestry Commission's there, local authorities are there. There's all kinds of routes you can go down to planting trees. One of the project drivers is the woodland creation offer, but there is sort of other brands available. I guess you could phrase it that way. So it's just trying to pick out the right avenue for you and get the advice to begin with. Getting it right as well, it could take multiple advisors. It's really cheesy to say, but planting your woodland, it is a bit of a journey, and you're going to start and you're going to have to close some doors, open others, and figure out where it goes. It's looking at the holistic nature of it as well. So what Chris was alluding to is thinking about tree planting, woodland creation, but everything else that comes with it. So one will be the financial driver and the mechanism to get you there, but it's just figuring out where's the best place to start. And even if that wasn't the right one, it should lead you to that opportunity. So I'd talk to everyone while you're here, take contacts away, sort of chat to each other. In terms of an agroforestry perspective, we're all still starting to figure things out a bit more, but there's real intent and passion and push to go with it, and it's a really nice piece of an existing puzzle that's coming together nicely. So, yeah, I think as a starting point, from a rivers perspective, because I work for a rivers trust selfishly, go and talk to a rivers trust, go and talk to a wildlife trust, anyone else who's acting on those parts of ground, and just chat to them. The main thing is trying to look at where you could plant, but also questioning where you shouldn't. That helps to start making decisions as well. So, yeah, it's really hard. It's all summaries this, but obviously there's a lot of detail, but we won't cover it here, but go and speak to people and you start sort of chipping away at the sort of pieces there. So, yeah, hopefully that covers it.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, we've had a couple of people come up to the stand today, and you can see that, landscapes are complicated, and it always does help to have those initial conversations with an advisor to really start to put that plan in place. So moving on from this, I'm
so sorry to interrupt, but I do have, I think, a very important question. Even though the title of this is Importance of Water for Landowners, may I just point out that I think I'm correct, about 50% of all farm land is in some sort of tenancy agreement. And are you aware you are therefore alienating all tenants in this conversation? So you need to include landowners and all farmers, those on old pre-1996 Agricultural Holding Acts, which go through the generations, and those post-1996 farm business tenancy agreements, which may only be for a year or two, but 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. If you are only pitching it at landowners, you do it at your peril.
Can I just reply?
Yeah, no, go for it.
I'd take that. That's a really valid point. I can only speak from personal experience. We're working with a lot of estates that have multiple tenants, and actually the energy and message there is quite positive because they're looking at how they can work together to meet these common goals. So.
Can I just point out, we've had zero input from our landowners.
Okay, that's not me, so
It's not a personal attack, but you need to address this in your job, that it also goes directly to those with the tenancy agreement, those with tenure, those living keystone species in the remote areas, often close to rivers. Don't miss them out.
I agree with that, and I think actually that doesn't just apply to woodland creation, that's all projects and actually all stakeholders and considerations. It can become complex and challenging, and you can meet all these different views and opinions, but eventually just having that conversation does breed good discussions. We've got such a challenge with the climate crisis on our hands that we need to have tough conversations to come with solutions. So I completely appreciate that. That is a very fair comment. I think genuinely, hand on heart, we are trying to do that and chat to everyone. Sometimes we get it wrong. We'll try and learn and do better. But it's a really important message, and I don't dispute it in some ways, but I can't speak for every landowner, every estate, everyone there. But I do hear what you're saying. So
include in your lingo those with tenure, including FBTs and agricultural holding acts.
Yeah, thank you. That's no. It's good. It's really good to get that kind of feedback, and it's always good to be inclusive. So we'll make sure that going forward that we do include that. Thank you for pointing it out. So thanks, Ben, for your last point. Naomi, I've got a question for you now, and this is: once you've potentially got a plan in place and you're interested in planting woodland, how easy is it then to access the information you need on payment rates and what options are available to landowners?
Thank you. Thank you. So on the point about tenancy, I'm very aware of that issue, and I'm sure that there's a talk later on that very topic, which I suspect will be very well attended. I've had some very interesting discussions with the Tenant Farmers Association, and we have been working very hard to make sure that the England Woodland Creation Offer is available for tenants as well as landlords. But I do recognise that there are still challenges. But very happy to chat about that further afterwards. And actually, I don't know if he's here right now, but Rory Lunny in my team, who is here, has been doing a lot of work on that, and we'll be able to talk to you in more detail about it. In terms of accessing information about what's available at the moment for tree planting and woodland creation, including riparian offers. We have a DEFRA campaign at the moment called the Put Down Roots campaign, which is targeting information towards all farmers and land managers. There's a landing page, which is the signposting point from which you should be able to drill down and find out the information you need about what's available in your specific area, including the maps of where different schemes apply, summaries of what those schemes include, and links to the individual delivery partner websites, including the Woodlands for Water and Riverscapes partnership. So it's all there. And there are also lots of excellent people here today to talk to, including colleagues from DEFRA, from Forestry Commission, from the Riverscapes Partnership. I would say I recognise that it's a complex picture. There are quite a lot of offers, and if I was on the ground trying to do it, I would find it confusing. And we had a very interesting conversation earlier today in the Sainsbury's tent about how important the advisory function is. So the ability of farmers and land managers to get advice on what's available and what might work for their farm and how they can adapt things to work on their farm is really important, and that's something that we recognise as government, and something that I'm constantly trying to make the case for the importance of that on-the-ground support to help navigate those offers that are available.
Yeah, and not wishing to labour the point, but I will bang on. I cannot overemphasise the importance and the effectiveness of peer-to-peer learning as well. So I think somehow in all this, if we can get the advisors and the NGOs and all the rest of it to harness people already doing things and use them to get these messages across to future practitioners, really useful.
Thanks, Chris. So I've been working on the Woodlands for Water project for 2.5 years, and I think I came into this quite naively. I don't think I'd realised how difficult it was to actually get a woodland scheme off the ground. We've learned a lot through the course of the 2.5 years, and hopefully these learnings come through today. But Ben, what do you think some of the key barriers have been in the Woodlands for Water project, and what do you think the kind of planting opportunities are in the future as well?
That's 2 questions in there. In terms of the barriers, I think one's a really good example, actually, from the tenant, landowner and all that perspective, is the stakeholder interest in it. There could be conflicting views, and how you overcome that. Chris's point about advisors, people talking to each other, the peer-reviewed stuff, and you mentioned about the complexity of it all. There is a need for us to all navigate this whole system together. Some of the barriers, I don't think we should call them barriers, but some of them are things like the statutory checks or the searches or the surveys. They're there for very good reasons, but it's just trying to apply them in the appropriate places and make sure we can overcome them. This just comes back to having constructive conversations about where they are an issue and whether they should be an issue. But most of the time, if we know about them, we can do them. We're well aware of timeframes. Timeframes could be a barrier. Someone might be desperate to plant trees. The analogy of best time to plant a tree, yesterday, tomorrow, something like that. So it's just trying to overcome them. From a river's perspective, think of everything. There's flood constraints. There could be habitat constraints. I said it earlier, think about where you're planting. Should it be a wetland? Should it be something else that's beneficial from a biodiversity perspective, a climate change mitigation perspective? Nutrient neutrality is in the news at the minute. We can still offset these things regardless of the mechanisms that are there to actually achieve it. UCO, or riparian planting, offers a really good opportunity for things like that. So ultimately, if we can think of the problems, we may have the solutions to them without having to wait for someone else to tell us how to do it. We can just ask and go. But yeah, I started with the advisory thing and who to contact and things. That's the best way, I think, to overcome the barriers, and just start from there. And yeah, just engage and discuss with people. That peer-to-peer thing, I think that's huge for us working to support people. It's massive in terms of case studies and organisations sharing what's worked. More importantly, what hasn't worked. We've used tree guards in the past that haven't worked. We're trying to come away from plastic. It's always a challenge. A big one with sort of riparian planting, you've protected an area of habitat. You're likely to get invasive species coming in because they just move up and down, well, down watercourses, up them if you're thinking of sort of crayfish or something. But these areas then need managing, so the maintenance payments and grants actually support that. So that's a really useful tool. So again, come up with problems all day long, but let's have the solutions as well. So yeah, just trying to think through each one. And if you're ever unsure, please ask. There's tons of people like me out there who want to help. Just get in touch and we'll do our best. So I think that's, yeah, a brief summary of some. There's probably loads more, but yeah.
I think probably the biggest barrier is in our heads, but it's a very, very serious one. Once you plant a hectare of land at, let's say, 2 meters or 3 meters tree spacing in a very sort of conventional woodland planting kind of way, that's it. You know, for the indefinite future, that is now woodland. It's a land use change. I think we know we're not going to plant our way out of climate change. Too late. And we think we all know we need to eat too. And that's why the advent of agroforestry being a thing that government perhaps really take on could be the saving or grace of Woodlands for Water going forward, where we can do things which do not preclude farming. If we get agroforestry right, if we get the spacings correct and the design right, we needn't lose any of the fruit growing capacity of land at all, and yet still bring a lot of environmental benefits of trees in with us. So, enough said.
Thanks, Chris. Before moving on, Naomi, did you want to come in quickly on some of the barriers, but also the opportunities as well?
Yeah, so it's interesting coming to these kind of events. So I hear a lot about the challenges around both conventional and agroforestry. work, and it's incredibly useful. It means that as a policymaker, I know what the things are that I need to go away and try and fix. And I think a lot of the barriers to riparian planting are common to other kinds of planting as well. And so my positive message is there's a lot of work going on across DEFRA and the Forestry Commission and our partners to reduce some of those barriers, particularly things around how long it takes to get applications through, looking at the permanency challenges, and the length of support that you get in terms of maintenance payments, the amount of time that you get to plant a scheme. All of those things are things that we're looking at and making progress on. It is a bit like trying to turn a tank around, but I hope we are starting to see it turn, and that people on the ground will start to see some of those benefits, and it will feel easier to do tree and woodland and agroforestry schemes. The other thing that I think we hear a lot is, well, you know, in the last few years, there's been a lot of funding available for trees and forestry, but governments change, priorities change. How do we know that, you know, we're making a big investment now? How do we know it's going to continue to be supported in the future? The thing that I would say from that perspective is that now we have the recognition of both the climate and biodiversity crises to focus our minds, and we have a statutory long-term target for woodland cover that government legally has to achieve. And believe me, that will focus the minds of the politicians. And as a policymaker, I see this as a priority that's going to roll forward indefinitely. So I hope that gives some comfort.
Thanks, Naomi. So, Chris, you are our living example of a farmer who's already implemented a number of schemes on your farm. How did you overcome some of these initial barriers?
By being bloody minded sometimes. I think that taking Kate's point, we have complete agency on our land, and we can more or less do what the hell we want to do. And so that's helped overcome a lot. And when, a few years back, the only route in agroforestry at all was through higher tier stewardship. And we had to fight like hell to get to do what we wanted to do. But it was just by not taking no for an answer and escalating the problem until eventually we ended up at regional and national level to someone who could actually understand what we were saying and then see that biodiversity outcomes would be better. It'd be really hard for Natural England to say we're not going to support your application because it might be good for great horseshoe bats. And that's so I think just being bloody minded has been a great help. We've done closed canopy woodland adjacent to our stream where it made sense to, and we've done agroforestry type plantings where it's made sense to, and indeed created river buffers. So the whole of our stream now is buffered one way or another with something. But mostly not particularly planting those, allowing with a natural regeneration. But that's it. And I think it's been we've probably achieved a lot by having a good FWAG advisor, because to try and navigate the paperwork is bloody hard work for someone whose main interest in life is driving a tractor. It's hard work. So yeah, get a good advisor would be my number one tip. And don't take no for an answer.
What's been your favourite scheme that you've implemented on your farm, Chris?
This wasn't aided in any way at all by any kind of grant thing, but bringing beavers to the property has been absolutely game-changing. And for anyone there who has any doubts at all, there is, if we're interested in biodiversity and water quality and actually having any water, there is nothing that beats beavers in headwaters. That's probably been the most important thing we've done, and we want to try and expand that. But honestly, I think getting wood pasture established is going to be desperately important going forward. I just look at the way cattle are behaving now, and climate change hasn't really taken off yet. Yeah, it's a bit warm today, but it hasn't really taken off yet. If we don't have shade in our fields, you need to keep your cattle indoors in summer. You know, that's the sort of nonsense we're faced with. So I think, I think that's been really important.
Brill, thank you. So we've already touched on that the woodland creation area is a very busy landscape, and that's also the same when we're looking at the different funding mechanisms that are out there. So we've talked a lot about the England Woodland Creation Offer, but you've also got offers like More Woods and Trees on Your Farm from the Woodland Trust, and also the Community Forest Offer that's also another DEFRA funded area. So Ben, my question's for you in terms of, are there any financial benefits or drawbacks from having all of these multiple schemes?
Yes. I'd say that the benefits and drawbacks are almost two sides of the same coin, depending on how you're approaching it. I said earlier about open and closing doors. If you look at the Woodland Creation Offer, a national scheme that anyone can take hold of and apply, given the right checks and constraints. The community forest stuff. So you mentioned Woodlands for Water. We, West Country Rivers Trust, Cornwall, Devon, Somerset and parts of Dorset as well. Our Pathfinder areas are Cornwall and Devon, and we've got two huge community forests. Forest for Cornwall is cover an entire county as a community forest. So, and what that means is there's no conflict. There's just loads of collaboration and engagement and working together. So we have strengths, they have strengths, and we can signpost each other towards stuff. The other thing is they can offer some slightly more novel and innovative things than we can't through UCO. So UCO's a driver for that specific project. There's other bits there, other options available. The Woodland Trust has offers, but if you think about scaling it down, so you look at national level, anyone can try and enter into it with the right opportunities. Local level, we can then deal with slightly more different stuff if one's not applicable. It comes down to a project level or a community level. So you might have, local environment agency funding for a project specifically targeting tree planting there. So it's trying to think of where you can make the different funding schemes fit with things. Private finance, consider that, natural capital marketplaces, all those sorts of things. If you can dream it and it's appropriate, we can make it fit. And this is where I come back to the point of go woodland creation, but go everything else with it as well. While you're on site, create extra efficiencies to push the biodiversity and everything with it. So, Chris, you mentioned agroforestry, like there is the barriers without having that there. I dare say there's other mechanisms and ways you can implement it. I want to promote trees anywhere in the landscape, hedgerows, letting trees grow on field corners. So it's just trying to look at which funding suits you and which is most appropriate. It comes back to getting the right advisor and going down the right avenue. I think getting that plan together in the start. So what we tend to do is say to people, where's your farm? So it can go one of two ways. They're either engaged and encourage us, or we'll go out and actively engage them. A simple opportunity for us is drawing that 20, 30 metre buffer down the river, showing what the finance or the funding return is and things like that, just starting with the woodland creation offer. We can figure out if something else would be more appropriate. More often than not, that will live on someone's coffee table or something until they've got a bit of time, and it'll come back with some extra scribbles on it. And suddenly we've done the river buffer and we're just pulling together the pieces, because the paperwork is a challenge, but you've got to do it to go and get everything else there. So if you're doing the paperwork, go for maximum opportunity. That being said, the other side is all these schemes work together. So stewardship will align with it, SFI, other finance and funding. So almost pick the opportunities that are your priority first and move forwards with them. You should be honest, there's a capital outlay to all this. There is an uplift payment, or there's money returned on certain bits, but there's an initial outlay. You need the contractors to do it. That's something I should have mentioned in the barriers, and I'm very sorry for. But having an industry of people that are qualified, skilled, experienced and passionate about doing this is so important, and we are nowhere near there yet. We are lacking incredibly. Like, this whole room is full of enthusiastic people, but we need more boots on the ground. We need to get behind things like apprenticeship schemes at sort of all levels and stuff. So, and again, from a funding perspective, we need to fund those roles. That's got to be paid for from somewhere. So, yeah, hopefully, have I covered the question, or have I just rambled completely?
No, that's perfect.
Fine. Yeah.
I'm just wondering, Adrian, More Woods is also a great alternative for smaller woodland schemes. So if you're looking to plant less than a hectare, that's also a great alternative. Do you want to expand on that offer a little more?
Yeah, it'll fund around about a half hectare upwards. Obviously, once you get beyond the 1 hectare plus, it starts to become more profitable to go into something like UCO. But this is a scheme that's quite light touch. It's easy to get into. It is UK wide, and it is pretty much open all year round. So, and you will get an advisory visit as part of that. So it's a neat way of maybe starting to dip your toe in the water, if you like. as an offer.
Perfect. And is there anything else you wanted to say for the trees on your farm offer?
If you're interested in agroforestry, there is a little bit of funding still available for any kind of agroforestry work. You can talk to me, or you can go to the Woodland Trust stand, and that's trees on your farms. So that's still open. It's usually oversubscribed, but we still have a bit of funding left for that. And the other scheme's more hedges as well. So that's similar to more woods, in the sense of you can apply online initially, and then you can start to put some hedges in. We've got funding. A lot of that funding's through either Lloyd's or Sainsbury's.
Perfect. Thanks, Adrian. So looking to the future, and again, when you're considering payment options, there's usually a lot of questions we get in terms of, well, why now? Why should we plant trees now? So Naomi, I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the kind of future funding opportunities and what will happen to UCO over the course of the next few years.
Yeah, so I mean, I think all the people in this room, there's no issue with the kind of broader reasons about why we need to plant trees now. But in terms of individual decision making on whether this is the right time to plant trees on the land that you own or manage, I mean, that's a very difficult thing for me to talk about because I don't own or manage land. But the things that I would say are we've tried to give as much clarity as we can about how particularly the England Woodland Creation Offer will roll forward into the future. And that will become part of the new environmental land management scheme. So in terms of if you were thinking of waiting around to see if there's going to be a better offer than UCO, particularly for the more conventional land management options and riparian planting, my advice would be don't wait. I think UCO is very generous, and the general structure of UCO and how it works will look the same. So there's no particular benefit to waiting. I think if you are interested in doing agroforestry, some of the kinds of agroforestry we've been talking about earlier, where there isn't an offer available yet, you might be better off waiting for a little while. But I really hope it will only be a little while, because there is a lot of work going on behind the scenes to finalise what that broader agroforestry offer will look like. And while you're waiting for it, why not dip your toe in the water, particularly if you're in a Riverscapes partnership area, and do some riparian planting if that works for your area of land.
Perfect, thanks. Chris, what would your advice be to any landowners, farmers, tenants who are looking to implement an agroforestry or woodland scheme? Is there any kind of golden advice that you would give?
Well, I mean, it's highly context-driven, of course, but if it's small, just get on with it and do it. Because trees aren't desperately expensive, and there are people out there falling over themselves to give you trees, such as Adrian's son on my right here. So just get on with it. If it's more and worthy of funding, if you're a real whiz with filling in forms, then have a go. But otherwise, get someone who really knows what's going on. I mean, I could tell you who it would be in Cornwall, but in different parts of the country, I can't. But you will probably know yourselves already who best to go to. I would say have a fairly clear concept of what you're trying to achieve before you go and speak to someone. And then after that, like I say, just don't hope for an answer. Keep pushing until it happens. Yeah, I think a lot of it is just about sheer bloody mindedness, really. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. So, Adrian, to close the session, reflecting on the discussion that we've had so far today, what are the key messages that you'd really like our audience to take away with them?
I think there's three key messages, really. There's one, going beyond the 1 metre buffer and thinking about the floodplain. So that's one key point. I think the other key point, there are multiple benefits. Benefits at the farm scale, benefits at the catchment scale for wildlife, economics and people that can be built in to design. And then the third is the opportunities now. There is funding. There are advisors out there experienced in this. I would encourage you to pop into the Woodland Trust tent or talk to one of us. the opportunities now, there is funding available.
Perfect, thank you. So yeah, thank you. That kind of summarises the discussion that we had today. But as I said at the start, now is really the opportunity for you to ask our lovely panellists any questions that have come up or anything that you have. So I think we will have 2 roving microphones. I think someone might come up and grab some of the ones on the stage. Perfect.
Share the rest between
Perfect, thank you. So yeah, I think the gentleman at the front. Yeah, thank you.
I think we all know water management is critical going forward. Drought and flood is going to increase in its severity. It's not going away. How do we best manage that water in the uplands and retain that water? How do we finance that retention of water? What does it look like? How are we going to approach what you'd call in Wales the ffrith, the ravines and gullies? Would you consider fencing off 50 metres wide either side of those ravines and gullies and let it naturally regenerate?
I'm wondering, do we split this question between Ben and Adrian? Ben, do you want... I know you... This might be the perfect one for you. Chris, if you could just pass your microphone down, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a very complex answer, really, which is not a good start, is it? But from a perspective of how we can resolve some of these issues, I think Chris's point of beavers in the headwaters is an opportunity, is an option. Without trees, I don't know how that works, though. We have some landscapes that do not have enough tree cover or canopy cover to support this. Let's just pick some species like willow, alder, the types of things we need there for these ecosystem engineers to work from. Beavers might not be your thing as well. So that's why when we talked about flooding and flood risk, obviously tree planting on the floodplain, this is sponsored by the Soils Association, it can improve soil condition as a starting point, things like that, up in these headwaters. The other thing you're probably looking at is from a morphological perspective of the benefits of that woody material, that change in flow regime, increase in the sinuosity and everything from there. So there's huge drivers around it. Exactly how much of each you want to go with is sort of questionable. It's whether you bring in stuff to that landscape as well to nudge it along to where you want it to be. It's also thinking about that landscape in terms of, so southwest, I picked Dartmoor, sort of granite up on the moorland. It's very much a part of a transportational regime, so at that stage you're going to be shifting bed load down through the catchment to support the rest of it. So tree cover and things will work up there, but based on the topography, those ravines might be a bit of a feature anyway, and it all depends on that topographical part of the landscape. But even within them, there's obviously changes and undulations because of the geology from there. So definitely sort of fencing off could be an option to answer the question, but it's also thinking about whether you need to kickstart with more or whether you want to add more species. One thing we haven't really alluded to, but is the sort of biodiversity side, but also the other side is the pest and disease side. So if you just put one thing in to that environment or just allow one species to colonise and something wipes it out, you've gone back to square one. You may have, well, not square one, but you've got problems that you're trying to resolve. So yeah, and it comes back to, without seeing that specific site on the environment, it's very hard to call. But other things are there. So if you think about the peatland restoration type projects and things, there's stuff like that you might want to support. So it's just trying to see what fits. And woodland creation is amazing. I will advocate it, but it's just seeing if it's the right one for your scenario. So does that help? Sorry, is that?
Yeah, I think that was a key point around it isn't just about the woodland, it's about other habitats. So peatland restoration can be really important in them upland environments. I think you said a very interesting set of words there around natural regeneration. Can we just fence it off and allow natural regeneration to happen? That is a great idea. However, is the seed source there in the first place? In some of these upland environments, it's not there. Another key point, I think, is looking at where this has already been done well. So there are good examples of large-scale peatland restoration, and there are good examples of tree planting combined. Some of the work we've been doing in Cumbria and linked to Lancaster University demonstrating the effectiveness of this approach. So that said, though, there's still a need to think a little bit carefully about the hydrological model, and there's a bit of baseline work in place that, but we can learn from other places as well. And I would look to Cumbria, I would look to parts of Yorkshire, and who else might fund that? The water companies are a plausible option as well, particularly, and trying to get the ecosystem services a bit better. I think the wire catchment is a very interesting example of how you can start to establish the right governance arrangements and ways to bring in funding for beneficiaries to work that you may be doing somewhere else in the catchment. So I hope that was helpful.
No, thanks, Adrian. I think it's a really exciting time at the moment when we're looking at environmental markets and how we're going to fund stuff. And as Adrian said, the wire is a great example, an early example of how that's being done. But there's also new markets arising, especially around water. So there's the volumetric water benefit accounting, which is branded as Replenish. So that's also a very interesting market for the future. Any other questions? Oh, gentleman in the front here.
Hi. Lady mentioned behind me about tenants being, harder to sort out. It's probably even more complicated than that. It's when multiple landowners have either side of the beck, and generally they do because the river tends to be the boundary between two farms. So then you've got to have both people on board, and then it's not much point having both sides of the river. You then need catchment sort of size stuff. So it's sort of really coming down to clusters of farms. Any cluster that's ever been set up with DEFRA as a sort of backer, as a funder, is an absolute nightmare to wade through. It needs to be far, far easier to join clusters open to fund. Otherwise, it's going to be a very sort of piecemeal approach.
Completely. Words out of my mouth. Clusters, they're far, far easier to talk about than to actually do, but I think there is a very bright future for them now, provided we can get farmers to talk to each other. In Cornwall, you can't get two farmers to agree on anything, let alone letting some beavers loose in the stream. It's really, really hard work. But I think circumstances will push us this way in time, and anything you can do to, if you're not in one already, to get one going, it'd be time well spent.
It was an interesting point on the beck or stream river, either side of it. I'm working through an example at the minute, and it's frustrating because we've got both landowners, tenants, either side, either side are in agreement, and they're looking at potentially the options. So I can't give it to them, but there's one making space for water, which is looking at how we manage that together, and they're both keen. The problem is at the minute is it potentially has to live with one of them, or the sort of stuff of how we look at it. So I think it's trying to keep checking through that we aren't where the blockers are. Chris's point of just keep pushing, that might be an opportunity, because for me personally, if you fence off either side of a stream, you, for want of a better way of putting it, create a field parcel in the middle that can be managed completely differently to the landscape either side. And what were worries and problems suddenly disappear slightly if you've got a combined agreement. It also makes you hopefully work with your neighbour. Maybe you've got a good relationship, but say there's conservation grazing in there, you can discuss between you who that supports. And to be fair, we haven't even touched on this, but supporting the farm businesses, that is the big thing behind these grants for what they're replacing. So that's where we need to make it come together. So I'm 100% behind those opportunities. I think we need to get better at doing that. I would love to myself. I can't solve it all, and I have to be honest, it's not perfect every time, but it's interesting to hear that that's something that you've seen, and I think that's something we should all take away sort of to work on together, because that's a really important piece of the puzzle, is boundaries being a barrier where they shouldn't be. So actually, if there's that benefit to the environment and it supports you both as a business, and there's call it a no-brainer, then that's something we should go for. So yeah, sorry, that just to add in on. You've got CABA, which is the catchment-based approach, which is the catchment partnerships. They're different across how they're run across sort of like all the counties and all the catchments and things, but ultimately the one sort of I look after, we try and get everyone in. So we're trying to have farmers on board, absolutely every stakeholder engaged. People don't agree, but at least they should be talking in a positive way and a constructive way with each other. The facilitation sort of side of thing, yeah, there's an objective there. I've got one interesting at the minute, a group I'm working with, which I'd almost call, it's in Cornwall, so call it a pie and a pasty group. The funds that are there seem too prescriptive to what actually their needs are, so we're just thinking about, is there a way to pay for a pie and a pasty and meet in a pub and start things going from there? Personally, if someone can have a fund that just pays for that, and if they need the receipts, that would be, I don't know if everyone can fund a pint of beer, but squash. But if that could be a starting point, and it wouldn't cost a lot, I don't think, just to look at catchments locally and get the sort of people engaged, I'd get behind that. But and that's what we try and do as a Rivers Trust, but we're held to the funding that supports us, basically, and that does come with parameters. But yeah, I basically agree. In short, it's something we should really try and do better. So yeah.
Oh, yep.
It's not really a question, but I just want to say thank you to the Rivers Trust and the Woodland Trust. I work for the Forestry Commission in the Southwest, and just that reassurance that all of us are working together really hard on the ground for the local farmers. So you contact any of us and we'll do your best to get the right funding to you, whether it's UCO or bespoke funding through community forests. So approach any of us and we'll help you to get trees in the ground.
Thank you. Oh, no, I didn't.
Hi everyone. Thank you. My question just relates to funding for invasive species along our river networks and whether there's anything available there. I'm sort of referring mainly to the dreaded Himalayan balsam. The fact that we've got some good riparian planting schemes is positive, but to see that understory of pink popping flowers for the future, is that something we're looking to tackle or not? Thank you.
I think this will probably be a very local specific question, but I don't know, Ben, if you know of any.
Yeah. So the short answer is there's probably stuff out there, but it's tricky to get hold of. Invasives doesn't always become fashionable to fund. We often try and use it as a secondary driver within other projects and schemes. So in simple terms, we're bidding for funds. There's key outputs that we need to go for, but this is added value with it. That being said, keeping it with the woodland creation idea, there is a maintenance payment in there. So I'm a firm believer that if you're planting a woodland and have a maintenance payment for it, tackling that invasive within that woodland block should be a really good opportunity for you. It doesn't solve the problems upstream. So the gentleman's question about farm clusters, that is one thing that group should be talking about straight away, is how can we deal with this? And it could be as simple as, there's lots of community groups, lots of volunteers, people engaged who want to work and support. Maybe just linking those people up can make a start from the top downwards with balsam as an example. We're sort of thinking both directions. But yeah, it's trying to fund it within the existing activities anyway is a good one. We're finding with a lot of our wetland projects, wonderful, restoring wetlands, reconnecting things, but you're kicking this balsam seed absolutely everywhere. So you need to go back and take it on. We're seeing really good results, people pulling, cutting with scythe. 2 to 3 seasons, you can almost eradicate it if you get in before the seeds burst. But then we come back to, if it's still upstream, it's not going away. So yeah, it's something, it would be good to see more of it, but I think if we can actually make it fit, and whether we need to push harder for it to be a prescriptive measure within some of these woodland schemes and things, actually to deal with it, managing our existing woodlands is a high priority that we've got to get better at. So we can add it into that one, as well as the new ones we're planting for the future. So, yeah.
Thanks, Chris. Just a quick question to the panel. How do you think certification bodies and perhaps other players in the industry, such as retailers, could better support trees for water, and perhaps should they get involved in the first place? Thank you.
Brill, Adrian, do you want to take this one? Because I know that Woodland Trust have done a lot of work.
Yeah, I've been trying to work more with corporates around, say, the relationship we've got with Sainsbury's, which is 20 years old now. We're starting to work more around supply chains, thinking about the whole farm, and incentives for suppliers to Sainsbury's that might add different value to the land and to the product. So there's that kind of route. There's a bit more of that. The Rivers Trusts have been doing some interesting work with corporates as well around how you start to fund that kind of activity. I don't know if you wanted to say something.
So in terms of restoration, in terms of river environments, wetlands, the Rivers Trust have a water stewardship program. So we work with big drinks manufacturers, the IT sector, any businesses that are abstracting a lot of water from the environment. We essentially want to talk to and help them look at how to reduce or offset that water footprint. So when you look at water stewardship principles, when you're working with a corporate, you have to work in the catchment where they're abstracting from. So for example, if you're a business and you're abstracting from an area in Scotland, you couldn't then offset that by doing a project in Cumbria. So you have to be looking at the catchment that you're working in. But this is something that we're seeing more and more businesses are now really taking as a priority, and they're really taking seriously. a lot of the businesses we now work with have targets in terms of how much they want to reduce their water footprint by. Many want to be neutral or even further than that. So it is an area that I think is really going to pick up and has already done so.
So I'll just add more generally on the kind of wider point about private finance coming in to pay for ecosystem goods and services. It's a very, very hot topic at the moment from a policy perspective. It's very complicated. I think it's very high up there on government's radar, the need to make sure that you avoid greenwashing, and that actually where corporates are investing in those kind of outcomes, they're investing in good quality outcomes. And there is a plethora of work going on that at the moment, but one that's particularly relevant in this context is the work to look at whether we can develop a woodland water code, which again would help to provide that integrity, that good value outcomes are being purchased, and avoid that greenwashing issue.
Are there any other questions? Oh, Alex, right at the back.
Hello. Just picking up the point about barriers stroke opportunities. There hasn't been much talk about the carbon. And do we think there's potential carbon opportunities to coalesce or to complement this ambition around riparian planting, water quality, all these stackable benefits? What's the panel's view on carbon opportunities and potential barriers around those?
I can kick off with some of the barriers. So as we've discussed, we're working in the riparian environment. So you're looking at small parcels of land. This is usually between 2 and 3 hectares maximum. When you're looking at then selling those carbon credits, usually you need a parcel of land that's above 5 hectares to make it financially stack up. When you're looking at these smaller schemes, there's obviously the option of grouping, so you can group with other landowners, but obviously this involves its own complexities in terms of contracting, where do the payments go, and it's definitely possible, we're not saying that it's not, but it just adds another level of complexity. But there are definitely lots of carbon offers out there. So through the Woodlands for Water project, we do offer independent advice. So basically, we've created a table of all of the kind of key carbon offers that are available in the UK at the moment. We present that to a landowner, farmer, tenant, and ask them to kind of then make their own decisions in terms of what they want to do. We haven't had great uptake in terms of selling carbon from our Woodlands for Water project. And again, that is mainly down to the parcel size that we're working in. But I don't know, Adrian, if you wanted to kind of come in on any kind of future opportunities that you see coming.
Yeah, brilliant answer, actually. Yeah, we do have a member of staff of the Riverscapes Partnership funded for 4 years who is focused on carbon and carbon schemes. And it's exactly what you were alluding to earlier around needing groups of landowners to collaborate together, because that's where there's real potential to get some carbon built in. And thinking about a portfolio type approach and getting the legal stuff right all becomes quite complex. That's something we really want to make work. So it's part of this project to explore just what the options really are around that. I still think we could make it work, but it is unfortunately complicated because of it being multiple landowners in riparian areas and tenants.
If I get the naming wrong, I am so sorry, but I overheard down the way in a tent earlier people talking about the Agroforestry Carbon Code, obviously coming along, potentially something that might be of interest. Obviously, you've got trees planted, spaced differently, so that could be a useful one as a mechanism. People much smarter than me will be figuring that out, but once it can be applied, that could be a good mechanism to utilise and use. If we can't put a buffer of woodland next to a river, agroforestry, silver pasture, whatever you want to call it, will be a great entity anyway. The other thing is we don't have to put woodland everywhere, a mosaic of habitats. So your point earlier on about dip your toe with the UCO stuff, then bring on the next piece of the puzzle, which is the agroforestry. That's how you start reconnecting every sort of piece of this landscape and just giving it back that way. So I thought I overheard it there. I don't know the specifics. Someone else will tell you much more detail, but that's worth that.
I'm very, very deeply conflicted on carbon. Paying for sequestering carbon is not going to get us out of where we're going. The only thing that will actually do that is stopping burning the bloody stuff. So while it will be really important to make some schemes go, it will not help us one iota in any practical terms. So I would like to see, if there is to be money for carbon, that it's combined with actually stopping burning, reducing the amount we actually burn. And government at the moment, we're in a neoliberal economy, and the idea of doing that is anathema. So I could get very sweary right now, and I'm not sure the bleep function is quite good enough on the recording setup here, so I'll try not to. We actually have to stop doing stuff, which is suicidal for our economy, but we've got to stop doing stuff. Because if we don't, our kids' chances are butchered. So, if not already. And I wish I could have a more hopeful note, but there really isn't one. We have to stop burning oil and gas and coal. And I know England's only tiny, what are we, 2% of the whole world's emissions, something crazy like that. But someone's got to set an example and start.
I think very well said. But on a more positive note, in terms of my perspective, having been in environmental policy making for a very long time, I am hugely excited about the prospect, not necessarily just of markets for carbon, but the wider markets for ecosystem goods and services. My entire life as a policymaker on the environment has been spent scratching around for funding to fund environmental projects. This could be a game changer, all the whole plethora of markets for ecosystem goods and services, if we get it right. There's a really important role for government to play in helping make sure we do get it right, and that we get the right framework and the right rules in place, and that we are able to stack where appropriate and not where not appropriate, etc. And that is an ongoing piece of work, and it's a challenge, and it's very complicated. But we are working on it. But hopefully that is going to be a game changer for the future as an environmental policymaker.
But it has to be both.
Absolutely, I agree with you.
Do we have any other questions? Oh, there's, yeah.
I would just like to actually slightly disagree with Chris in that it is not going to crash the economy if we stop burning stuff. There's a massive potential for doing all these things. We could easily do it if we just had the will to do it. You don't have to crash the economy by stopping burning stuff. Definitely not. We've got plenty of opportunity to do renewables. There's all sorts of stuff going on and could go on even better. And that's a more positive note, I think. So I'm sure you don't have to crash the economy just by stopping burning stuff.
Well, we only have 10 minutes left anyway, and I know it's really warm, and I can see everyone struggling slightly. So I think everyone should go and get a nice cold drink. But thank you all for attending, and thank you so much to our lovely panelists today.
Thank you for listening. We'd like to thank our lead sponsor, Sainsbury's, and our other major sponsors, Farmers Weekly Transition, Forestry Commission, and Till Hill, and all the attendees for making this show such an overwhelming success. To get advice and support for your agroforestry project, either visit woodlandtrust.org.uk/plant or soilassociation.org/agroforestry.